The intercom gave a single sharp crackle, then nothing. In the sudden quiet of the cabin, a calm voice from somewhere near the back said, "Captain, this is the cabin. Do you copy?" Silence answered. The same voice, steadier now, added, "All right. We're going to keep the aircraft flying." Before you watch the full story, comment below. Which country are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story might be even bigger. Margaret Hale sat in 23A, with a paperback open on her lap and a small silver wings pin turning slowly between her fingers. The edges were worn smooth from decades of the same quiet habit. She was 68, gray hair clipped back without fuss, wearing a plain navy cardigan that had been washed too many times. The young flight attendant who passed her seat barely slowed. "Just ring if you need anything, ma'am," the girl said. The way people speak to someone they expect will stay quiet and grateful. Margaret only smiled and kept turning the pin. She had said the same thing once, years earlier, to a nervous new hire in a crew room that smelled of coffee and jet fuel. "When the cockpit goes quiet," she had told the girl, "the plane starts talking to anyone who still knows how to listen." The words had felt almost foolish at the time. Now they sat in the back of her mind like an old key. The flight was a late afternoon hop, 3 hours, half full. Outside the window, the sky was the soft gray of early evening. Across the aisle, a businessman in a crisp shirt kept checking his watch and muttering about connections. 2 rows forward, a mother tried to quiet a restless toddler with a bag of crackers. The senior flight attendant, a tall woman named Denise with perfect posture and a voice trained for calm announcements, moved through the cabin with the easy authority of someone who had never once been questioned. Margaret watched her without expression. She had been that woman once. A faint, almost polite chime sounded from the forward galley. Denise frowned at the panel, pressed a button, waited, then pressed it again. Nothing. She walked a few steps to the cockpit door and knocked twice. The standard pattern. No answer. She knocked harder. Still nothing. The businessman across the aisle glanced up, irritated. "Something wrong?" Denise gave him the practiced smile. "Just a communication check. Everything's fine." Margaret's thumb stopped moving on the wings pin. The air in the cabin felt the same, yet something in the pressurization had shifted by a fraction. She felt it in the subtle pressure behind her eyes, the same way she used to feel it 30 years ago when a pack started to drift. She closed the paperback and slipped the pin into her palm. Denise tried the intercom again. The crackle came back empty. She turned to the second attendant, a younger man named Tyler, and spoke low. "They're not answering." Tyler's face tightened. "Maybe headsets off?" Denise shook her head once. "Both of them?" She reached for the handset again, voice still steady for the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief communication issue with the flight deck. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Margaret felt the first real change in the cabin air. Thinner, almost sweet. The toddler too rose up, rubbed his ears, and began to fuss harder. The businessman loosened his collar. Denise's cheeks had gone faintly pink. She knocked on the cockpit door a third time, harder, using the emergency code pattern this time. Silence. "Stay with me here, because what happens next is the part nobody saw coming." Denise turned to Tyler, voice low and clipped. "We're declaring, get the portable oxygen and the AED to the forward jump seat. I'm going to try the access code." Tyler hesitated. "You can't just open it without—" "I know the protocol," she cut him off. Her hands were already moving to the keypad. Margaret rose from her seat. The wings pin was warm in her fist. She walked forward slowly, the way a passenger might stretch her legs, until she stood a few feet behind Denise. "They're not going to answer," she said quietly. Denise looked over her shoulder, surprised and already irritated. "Ma'am, please return to your seat." "I flew for 32 years, Margaret said, still soft. "If both pilots are quiet this long, something's wrong with the air." Tyler stepped between them. "We've got this handled. Please sit down." Denise's fingers hovered over the keypad. "Ma'am, I need you to sit." Margaret met her eyes. "If you open that door, and the oxygen partial pressure is already low. You'll both be on the floor in under a minute. Let me talk you through the mask check first. Denise's mouth tightened. You're a passenger. I was a senior purser on heavy metal for 2 decades. I've sat jump seat through more depressurization drills than you've had birthdays. The words came out without heat. You can ignore me after you put the masks on, but put them on. The businessman had half stood. Is this woman serious? We're in the middle of a flight. Denise stared at Margaret for a long second. Then she reached for the nearest oxygen bottle, cracked the valve, and took 3 deep breaths. Tyler did the same, hands shaking. The cabin air still felt soft and wrong. Margaret watched the color return slightly to Denise's face. All right, Denise said finally. Talk. Margaret's voice stayed even. First, confirm the cabin altitude on the panel if you can see it through the viewing port. If it's climbing past 10,000, the outflow valves are the problem or the packs are offline. Second, the pilots may already be hypoxic. Confusion looks like calm until it doesn't. When you open the door, one of you stays on the bottle, the other moves straight to the left seat. Don't touch the yoke until you feel the pressure on the controls. If they're both unresponsive, the autopilot is still flying us. That's good. We leave it alone until we know the altitude and the heading. Denise's jaw worked. She entered the access code. The door unlocked with a soft clunk. Cold, thin air spilled out. Both pilots sat upright, eyes open, hands resting loosely. Neither moved when Denise called their names. Margaret stepped past her without waiting for permission. She slid into the right seat, the one she had never been rated for, but had watched 1,000 times. The wings pin went into the side pocket of the seat, the same place she used to keep her own checklist. The primary flight display showed them level at 31,000, autopilot engaged, heading steady. Cabin altitude was already 11,400 and climbing. She reached for the oxygen mask above the seat, pulled it down, and sealed it over her face with the practiced motion of someone who had taught the drill more times than she could count. The cool flow hit her lungs. Clarity returned in a single breath. Denise, she said through the mask, voice muffled but clear, tell the cabin we're beginning a controlled descent. No one stands up. Tyler, get every portable bottle you can find and start the passengers on them starting from the back. Slow and calm. Denise hesitated only a second longer, then nodded and moved. Margaret's hands found the radio. Center, this is November 478 Echo on 121.5. Both pilots incapacitated, suspected hypoxia, cabin altitude climbing. Request immediate lower. We are maintaining heading and beginning descent at this time. The controller's voice came back sharp and professional. November 478 Echo, Squawk 7700. Descend and maintain 10,000. Say souls on board and fuel remaining. Margaret answered without looking away from the instruments. The numbers came easy. She reduced thrust, eased the nose down a few degrees, felt the aircraft answer the way a living thing answers someone who still remembers its language. The wings pin in the side pocket caught the panel light once, a small flash of old silver. Somewhere behind her, the businessman had gone quiet. The toddler had stopped crying. Denise's voice moved through the cabin like a steady tide, guiding people onto oxygen, checking seatbelts, never once raising her volume. The descent took 17 minutes. Margaret kept the rate smooth, the airspeed in the green, the heading locked. When the cabin altitude finally began to fall, she felt the pressure ease behind her eyes the same way she used to feel it after a long night flight into somewhere cold and clear. She left the autopilot in until 5,000, then hand flew the last part, the way the old captains had taught her in quiet moments on empty legs years ago, small inputs, patient, no drama. The runway lights appeared out of the dusk, like a promise kept. She flared a fraction late, the touchdown a little firm, but the nose stayed straight, and the brakes took the weight without complaint. When the aircraft rolled to a stop on the taxiway, the only sound in the cockpit was the soft rush of the oxygen and the distant wail of approaching emergency vehicles. Margaret sat still for a long moment, mask still on, hands resting lightly on her thighs. Then she reached into the side pocket, took out the silver wings pin, and closed her fingers around it once more. Denise stood in the doorway, face pale, eyes wet. "I didn't believe you," she said. Margaret only nodded. The airport medical team came through a moment later. They moved the pilots carefully. One of them, still oxygen-masked, still confused, looked at Margaret and managed a weak, grateful sound that might have been a word. Outside on the hard stand, a supervisor in a high-visibility vest approached with a clipboard and a look of someone who had already heard 3 different versions of the same story. He listened while Denise spoke, then turned to Margaret. "You're the one who flew it down." "I kept it flying," she corrected quietly. "The airplane did the rest." He studied her for a second, then offered his hand. "Whatever you call it, you just saved 114 people. We'll need a statement. But first, thank you." Hours later, after the interviews and the quiet medical checks and the long walk through a terminal that smelled of coffee and floor polish, Margaret sat on a hard plastic chair near the baggage claim. The wings pin rested open in her palm again. Her daughter found her there, rushed in from a last-minute drive, eyes red, and folded her into a fierce, silent hug. "I kept hearing your voice in my head the whole way," her daughter said against her shoulder. "The one about listening when the cockpit goes quiet." Margaret smiled into her hair. "I didn't think anyone still remembered that." They drove home under a sky that had finally gone full dark. In the morning, Margaret made tea the way she always did, slow and exact, and set the silver wings pin on the windowsill where the light could reach it. The house was the same. The quiet was the same. Only the quiet itself felt different, less empty, more earned. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. There's a new one waiting for you tomorrow. The silver wings pin caught the early light on the windowsill and held it, small and steady, long after the kettle had finished boiling.